wisdom, wisdom, the art and science of games. Joining me, as always, my co-host from soon-to-be unknown Nexus Games, Sharky.
It's Shark Unknown Nexus Games.
There you go. So, this week we are continuing our What is a Game series, examining the major genres and the uh, elemental or the major elements of their designs. Last week we did Metroidvania and action adventure, and for this week we are going to beat 'em up and fighting games. Are you getting your bare knuckle ready, Shark?
I'm just blazing to take a stab at this.
Mm-hmm. All right, so beat 'em up and fighting games. This is we're trying to keep things being, I guess, thematic for each one of these episodes, and the fighting genre and the beat 'em up genre both share very unusual similarities in that they both have not really had like a huge mechanical change, or at least as much of a shift compared to other genres. Would you say?
Yeah, and another thing about them is they're eerily very similar mechanic wise, and even though like gameplay wise, game feel wise, when you play one, they're vastly different, from each other.
Mhm.
But mechanically, they're they're nearly identical in so many ways.
Mhm.
It's this weird thing where just the smallest changes can just vastly
Mhm.
change what it feels like.
Yeah, and that's kind of been one of our mission statements for this series, in that we start with very generalized genres, platformers, action games, like things where the DNA, I think, really can it's spread far and wide in terms of those mechanics.
Mm,
But now we're getting into some of the more, I guess, specific or more explicit kind of designs where it's so razor focus that or laser focus that just one simple change and you have a completely different genre.
mm-hmm.
So we're gonna start with beat 'em ups because one, they're the older of the two genre, and there's a little bit more we can discuss mechanically. When it comes to historical nature wise, I think there's a lot more to the fighting game genre, especially over the last decade, with
Yeah.
how much things have grown with esports and just this kind of push and pull between that audience.
As well as Josh and I are obviously biased towards beat 'em ups because me and Josh make it a habit to to play every beat 'em up together kind of thing.
Hmm. If there's
But
multiplayer, though.
yeah, and both of us really don't care for most fighting games, but it's weird how we don't, even though they're mechanically almost identical.
Hmm.
It's it's that weird one thing can just completely flip how you think of
Hmm.
things.
Yep.
It's
Yep. Go ahead.
I'm trying to think of an analogy. It's like I got one, but it's going to get us demoted, so I'm going to refrain.
There we go. So the beat 'em up genre has, of course, its roots in the arcade industry, with the likes of Double Dragon, Final Fight, and then it began to be moved to the console. And of course, some of the major names like the beat 'em up genre is definitely like Konami's bread and butter in the arcades, with TMNT, X-Men, what was it, Cadillacs and Dinosaurs. Hey, Mike,
Hey, Mike.
and it was one of those genres that, again, like one of the first in terms of cooperative multiplayer, or cooperative until you start beating each other up or punching someone in the back of the head.
Or throwing a knife in their back.
Hmm.
And a lot of them were cooperative in the very slightest terms to where you couldn't turn off damage to other players.
Oh yeah, and the beat 'em up genre as a whole is it was kind of interesting. Here's like another like weird intersection of their designs I didn't think about until now. Both the fighting game and the beat 'em up genre represent two different aspects of metrics-driven design, or how games are designed for arcades and to maximize their value. So, the beat 'em up genre was built or heavily tuned towards a player getting stun locked if they weren't careful. Your specials cost a lot of health, so if you get in trouble and you use your special too much, you're going to get closer to death, which means you're going to get closer to putting in another quarter. When we saw that transition to the fighting game genre, this was, I think, what, like 91, 92 ish, I think, when Street Fighter 2 came out, that they switched the metrics over to the fact that if I lose in a versus mode, one person has to put a quarter in, somebody else stays on. So as long as, money is being, put in every, 3 minutes of time, they were fine with that.
Hmm. And that's
Hey,
also
so,
another reason why the fighting game put in the timer
hmm
to ensure that they're getting something every 3 minutes
yep.
while the game is running.
Oh, yes. And again, like, both genres they were quarter crunchers, just for different reasons, I guess.
Unless
Yep.
you got good.
Yeah. And it is a great, I guess, slice of kind of how much game design has changed and what made these genres so popular. So with the with the beat 'em up genre in particular, I mean, it's a game where you just walk around on those mean streets beating up bad guys. I mean, who doesn't like to do 27 jump kicks in the span of 3 minutes?
The mean streets of rage.
Mm-hmm. And there were, of course, and there's so many examples. Like again, like the beat 'em up genre and the fighting game genre. I mean, when we think about it, I'm thinking about more like we did pit two really good genres to pair together because how much their designs really mesh. That when we look at kind of the heights of both, they're both built around just crazy situations happening. Whether it's guy walking around the street smacking people with a pipe, Blaze somehow shooting that little like almost like Chung Li style fireball, or Chung Li shooting a fireball.
Hmm. And the other aspect is they're both very, very niche genres because neither one have really like blown up. Like you look at even the biggest examples like Streets of Rage 4 and River City Girls and all this other stuff, and they're not all that big kind of thing. Fighting games are a lot bigger,
Mm-hmm.
but that's mainly just because of the esports side of things. They're not.
Yeah.
If you just look at if you take the whole esport side away, which I meant
Mm-hmm.
the esport is mainly just watching somebody play rather than actually playing,
Mm-hmm.
then their fighting games are pretty niche, themselves
And
too.
and as a point of reference, Mortal Kombat 11 on Steam right now, probably one of the bigger fighting games released in the last like 3, 4 years,
Hmm.
sits at just under or just over 41,000 reviews. And that's an impressive number, but we've seen games with far higher. Dragon Ball Fighter Z is sitting at just over 32,500 reviews, and that's another one that blew up.
Yeah, but I mean, compared to like even just mainstream indie games, that's and that's AAA, mind you.
Oh,
Both
yeah.
of those are AAA, and those numbers can be dwarfed by some of the indies. You know,
Yeah. Celeste has over 40,000 reviews at this time,
yeah. So
and
Celeste makes them both of the AAAs look small.
yeah, and Disco Elysium is at almost 42,000 on Steam.
What is
So,
Stardew Valley at?
let's see. I bet it's higher than both. Let's
I'm betting
see.
it is too.
Oh God, yes, it's at 347,000.
So Stardew Valley only sold what, almost 10 times what Mortal Kombat 11 did, and keep in mind Mortal Kombat 11 is like AAA
Mhm.
and Stardew
Yeah,
Valley is like a
Star,
small indie.
yeah, Stardew Valley committed a capitalismality there.
Yeah. And you look at beat 'em ups. I mean, what is Streets of Rage hit? Streets of Rage 4.
I think we said
I think that was
about
like 13, wasn't it?
11,554.
So it's like a third of what Mortal Kombat did.
Mm-hmm.
And keep in mind that that's AAA, so like, when AAA is having, putting their weight behind things and not getting that much, that
Mm-hmm.
great of numbers kind of thing, that shows how niche the genres really are.
Yep, and don't forget that when we talk about Streets of Rage, Mortal Kombat, Dragon Ball, those are big name brands.
Yeah, those are
They
the
are,
Stardew of the fighting games and beat 'em ups and such.
yep, like those genres are, or those brands are certainly not niche. And
Actually, they're
even,
more like the Call of Duties kind of thing of the fighting games.
hmm and even like their top of the top still does not compare to a lot of the other games and other genres that we've played. And it's a very similar parallel, I think, to the adventure game genre that will be coming up in a future episode. That even the most recognized big name adventure games
Are pretty
do
small.
not pull, yep, do not pull in anywhere near the same sales figures or reviews that some of the other genres get.
Yep, it's very, very niche genres. And
And,
that's probably part of the reason why we don't have very many of either one of them. Because
and
there's not a whole lot of fighting games. There's not a whole lot of beat 'em ups out there on Steam. Like, it's a very,
mm,
very small market. Just like there isn't very many CCGs out there.
yeah. And when we say small, we're talking about, there are, people will probably name big name fighting games in the comments below, but that list is certainly dwarfed by the number of visual novel games, action games, platformers, RPGs,
Oh yeah, you
and
could probably name, like if you went and did some hardcore research, you could probably find 100 plus beat 'em ups. But you
mhm,
could probably look on like a given week on Steam and find 100, visual novels.
and every 2 months a new roguelike comes out.
Yeah, I mean, you could. We're talking about small for the industry, not like single digit numbers.
Hmm.
We're talking. There's hundreds, maybe, of beat 'em ups, fighting games, CCGs, that kind of thing, where there's hundreds of thousands of visual novels, millions of platformers probably.
Yeah. And I think part of it, and again with this this slice between fighting games and beat 'em ups, is that there really hasn't been as much in terms of evolution in terms of their mechanics. And again, we can draw parallels to the adventure game genre that they attract a very specific niche of consumers. Again, it's the reason why Shark and I are huge beat 'em up fans, but we're not huge fighting game fans, despite again those similarities.
Hmm. And it, they may be dying genres kind of thing, like the Avenger games.
Hmm.
But
And
I don't think they've pigeonholed themselves to the point that Avenger games have, because I think
hmm
they could still grow and expand.
yep, and we've seen like very specific examples, I think, in both genres of that. Like, for instance, Fight and Rage. The idea of being a far more technical, more like combo chaining beat 'em up that we're not normally used to.
Hmm. But the issue is that game did not do well.
No.
I mean,
And then,
it did pretty good for a beat 'em up,
hmm
but that's not very well.
yeah.
Because I mean, they had what was it, like 2,000 3,000 reviews?
Yeah, something along those lines. And the game itself, or some other examples, would be kind of the use of adding in RPG mechanics, the River City franchise, that RPG roguelike beat 'em up. Like we're starting to see a little bit more in terms of beat 'em up roguelikes, which I think is very interesting. But it's still wait and see on whether or not that's going to really hold water.
I have a design that has, in mind that of a beat 'em up I want to make that is a beat 'em up with rogue elements kind of thing. It's not a rogue. It's a beat 'em up, but it has rogue elements to it. And it also has
Okay.
RPG elements to it and a few other things. But like
Mhm.
the core is a beat 'em up. But I think that the genres can still grow. I don't think the adventure game genre can grow though. But
Not without, I think, a massive redesign. But again, a massive redesign is going to alienate those fans. And
yeah, which means that it can't grow.
yeah, and when it comes to the fight 'em up, or the fight 'em up, there, I just create a new genre there. According with fighting games, the biggest, I think, evolution, again, biggest with air quotes here, has been trying to get more of a casual or non-hardcore audience to them. And I think the most successful example of this would be NetherRealms, with trying to add more single player, more offline content to MK10, 11, and the Injustice series.
hmm But
So,
the maybe it's time we focus in on beat 'em ups.
mhm. So when it comes to beat 'em up design, it is typically done in kind of like a. Do we consider that to be 3D or more like of a 2D?
It's it's 2D, but it's a plane instead of a side scrolling,
Hmm
So it's basically top down, sort of like a tactical RPG kind of thing, to where you can not just move side to side, but you can move up and down kind of thing. But it's not grid based like a tactical RPG.
Would you consider it 2.5D?
Not most of them.
Hmm
To be 2.5D, they would have to either be probably using 3D assets to make their 2D, game, or they'd have
hmm
to be using an actual 3D world and map with 2D characters on it
hmm
to really do that.
So when it comes to the general gameplay, it has always kept a very basic design. You can walk, you can punch, and of course there's usually a jump or a throw involved. And
If you wanted to dive deeper into it, kind of thing, like
mhm,
you couldn't call it 2.5D, but I mean you could call it like a 2.25D kind of thing because it blurs the line. But you could also call a tactical RPG that too.
mhm,
But like it's still just a 2D game. So
mhm,
I would just stick with 2D.
mhm. So general gameplay is just kind of going through the same basic loop from stage to stage. With, of course, the notable exception of this would be something like Battletoads, and we'll spend a few minutes on that game in a few minutes. But the thing about a lot of beat 'em ups is that level design or environmental design oftentimes doesn't really matter in a sense because you're just walking in one direction, beating up whatever crowds of enemies show up.
At least sometimes. You don't do that in Fight and Rage.
Hmm
You can go in multiple directions in Fight and Rage. You choose your path kind of thing. Also with like River City Girls, they have like a city map, so you can go in several different directions in that way.
Hmm.
More free roaming, I guess you would call it.
Yeah. But for the most part, and for what a lot of people consider beat 'em up games, it is just being able to walk in one direction and be whatever comes your way. And a lot of the spectacle is what kind of sells people on these games, where you can knock enemy, up into the air and then continue a combo, or you hit them so hard that the upper part of their torso rips off. And yeah, and like again, like animation, being able to just put together a crazy string of attacks, and the general kind of design of these is more about trying to mitigate the threats of these enemies. Like if you stand directly in the middle of the screen, you're gonna get hit from both sides and just get knocked out. So it's more about trying to keep enemies on one side, keep don't prevent them from crossing over, and just doing what you can to deal with them as quickly and as efficiently as possible.
Mm-hmm. And you have to, you know, it's oftentimes good to not let enemies glob up. Sometimes it is whenever you can hit them all at once, but at the same time, you don't want to let them glob up in a way that, while you're hitting the other guy, that one hits you in the face.
Hmm. Oh, and a foreign probable question that we were talking about last night.
Yep. We'll get to that later.
Yeah. And with here's a question for you, Shark. There's a subgenre to this subgenre in terms of games where it's just boss fights. There were a few of these in the arcade. We could maybe even consider something like not so much a beat 'em up, but the type of design would be something like what was it? BattleTech and those like these Super Scope games where it's just you fighting a boss, or maybe something like Punch Out. Would you consider these to be like a fighting game or a beat 'em up, or some other kind of genre definition?
Punch out. I think a punch out has to be a boxing game.
Hmm.
It's not a beat 'em up. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in, or a fighting game, but there's a lot in there kind of thing. It would be another subgenre or something, and we don't see a lot of punch out based games or boxing games
Hmm.
out there.
Yeah, we saw a few people try and copy after Punch Out first came out. I think there was like a Interstellar one. There was I think a Genesis one, but it kind of never really stuck in terms of the rest of the genre.
And I tell you the big reason why Punch Out itself stuck so hard is
Hmm.
because of a few key reasons. Number one, Nintendo. Just be
Hmm.
Nintendo. Number two, the cast of characters in there are insane. There is so much in between them that is crazy. They all, you could point out to any of those enemies today, King Hippo, Glassjaw Joe kind of thing, any of them, and like they have like very iconic designs even by today because like
Hmm.
there's never been characters look like that before. And even like their naming convention, the way they went with their, something about their fighting, and everything. And like I could name like several characters from there, and I cannot name several characters from pretty much any game I play. I couldn't name a single character from Stardew Valley. I couldn't name a single character from uh a lot of stuff. I can barely name characters from Final Fantasy games, and I dearly love those. The fact that those names are so concrete, and I didn't even play Punch Out all that much. I only played it like over a friend's house kind of thing. And I
Hmm.
remember those characters vividly, even though I barely played it.
Hmm.
I probably had like, maybe an hour most total gameplay time between all the times I played it. And I
Yeah.
remember those characters. And there's games I played 40 hours of, and I don't remember a single dang name because those characters were so iconic. Such
Hmm.
good character design and naming and everything else, and, just made it completely unforgettable.
Yeah. And character design is another aspect of both beat 'em ups and fighting games. That you need to have very distinctive characters. And you may not think about that in terms of the beat 'em up genre. That it is just, like everyone just basically does the same kind of punch or the same kind of jump kick. But you can differentiate themselves in terms of their general stats. You can have somebody like Blaze, who's more on the speedier side, does less damage per hit, but can hit faster. You can have somebody like, Mike Haggard from Final Fight, who's slow and is basically known for pile driving people.
Yeah, and you have like all around fighters as well, and you,
Hmm.
you have all different styles of fighting, and and reaches too. Like if you look at the original like Turtles arcade game,
Hmm.
the the main thing that defined them was the reach of, and damage of their weapon, which actually made Donatello the most OP of them all because he had all the reach.
Hmm. And apparently, Raphael is the OP one for speedrunners, and I think Turtles in Time just because of his special, or was that TMNT 4? I forget. And yeah, oh yeah, we did play Alien Storm. That's an interesting one. Like we've seen some beat 'em ups do something a little bit differently in terms of their general combat. There was that I think it was a Knights of the Round Table beat 'em up where instead of fists you use swords and axes. Golden Axe. There's one that we've
Yeah,
never played before.
no, never.
And, Alien Storm, where you replace swords and axes with you're shooting lasers. And instead of having that one was kind of cute for like how the combos could end. Like I remember like the robot, his combo chain would end with him like shooting like a little rocket out of his back that would hit the enemy.
Don't forget the X-Men games where you had like
Hmm.
Nightcrawler who teleport across the room. You had
Hmm.
Wolverine with his claws. You had Dazzler would do
Colossus,
explosions. Colossus did his whole metal body thing and area effect
mhm,
around him.
yeah,
All
and
kinds of stuff.
there's that one that we played from the Beat 'em Up collection. The Capcom one was like you would fight and then you get into like a giant robot, and then you would just beat everyone up in your giant robot, and you go back down to your normal robot.
Yeah, I enjoyed Golden Axe, but there's a lot of pain points in that one.
Yeah, and that's one of the things about the Beat 'em Up genre that the whole kind of MO of it, and we could even argue with fighting games, is how well can you keep control of the situation. Because you're dealing with a very heavily tuned AI in most cases in beat 'em ups, if you let them get out of sync or you can't keep them in one spot, you're in big trouble. As when you fight those skeletons in Golden Axe.
Mm, especially, and then you have like the skeletons and other enemies like being able to like not be affected by some of your attacks at some points.
Hmm. Yep, the idea of having like super armor is a really good example.
Hmm.
Or they are oftentimes programmed that if you are within attack range when they get up from off the ground, they get a free hit no matter what. And that wake up is nasty in some beat 'em ups.
Hmm. I know Fight and Rage had with those cats that did the wake
Hmm.
ups every time,
Yep.
and a
And
few
certainly
other
River
enemies.
City Girls had that as well with a lot of their enemies.
Yeah, I think it's better when wake ups are just for specific characters kind of thing rather than all of them because it provides variance in there between characters so that they're not as samey kind of thing. And
Yeah.
a very, variety of characters are, very, very important. Josh and I talked about this, was it last night or the
Yeah.
night before?
Could have been last night we were talking about the pre-stream.
But we talked about it, and like we were talking about how many characters is the max amount of
Hmm.
characters you could have in a beat 'em up kind of thing.
Yeah.
And realistically, probably about 10. But you probably don't want to put that many, But
Hmm.
it would be technically the answer would be as many as you could make feel very, very different from each other. But,
Hmm.
10 is not the technical limit to that, but I mean, if you're talking about the reasonable limit to that, probably like 5 or 6 kind of thing. And it's, you don't want your characters to feel remotely the same. And that's kind of a downfall of like Streets of Rage 4 is it has so many characters and so many of them feel so similar to each other. I mean, you have Blaze normal for that, and then you have Blaze from Streets of Rage 1. You have Blaze from Streets of Rage 2 as well, don't you?
Yeah, you have all the different variants. You have their older versions, and you even have. Oops, sorry, I think I just exited on my screen. There we go. And you even have the newer versions. You can make 6 of them. Yeah, exactly. You can have reskins and like the newer characters. Like when they add in, what was it? Sheva, uh, New Max, um, the other one, the one who was a boss. Like their moveset is just completely different from everyone else.
Well, what you could do instead of doing 6 with, reskins kind of thing, is do 6 with cosmetics that you can put on them, You can put a hat on this character, put this hat on this character, put this hat on this character. You know, could you imagine like if Streets of Rage did that and you put like a monocle on, on Blaze? That
Hmm.
would be hilarious. Or you could put a cowboy hat on her, or a top hat,
Hmm.
Jane, whatever. You could really go, nuts with that kind of thing. But
Hmm.
like the when we're talking about character limit, we're not talking about reskins or cosmetics or anything like that. We're talking about just the core characters, aka a move set with a identifiable character behind it.
Hmm. And that was one of the things that Fighting Rage did well with having their 3 distinct characters. Now, another point, I think this is where it gets very interesting in terms of beat 'em up design or just the lack of evolution, is how technical should a beat 'em up be? If we look back at, like the first generation, Streets of Rage 1, TMNT, Simpsons games, that your moveset is basically walk, punch, jump, throw, and then maybe like a super sometimes. Now, if we look even more forward, we will start looking at kind of some of the recent examples, stuff like Fight and Rage, River City Girls, even something like Streets of Rage 4. We now have charge moves. We have a buildable super or a special move. I think I don't think Streets of Rage had this, but I know Fight and Rage had. You can have a parry that if you time your block just right, or you time pushing forward just right, you can cancel an enemy attack. And there was that we played the Kickstarter to that beat 'em up that feels even more like a fighting game that has, cancelable supers, assist modes, and things like that. So the question is, how advanced can you reasonably make a beat 'em up before it doesn't feel like a beat 'em up anymore?
Well, I think the reason why we have such progression like that is because of controllers.
Hmm.
Because controllers back in the day, 2 buttons. Controllers now, 4 buttons plus shoulder buttons plus trigger buttons plus
Hmm.
a whole bunch of other buttons. Two analog sticks, a D-pad. There's a whole lot of stuff now where there wasn't so much at the beginning. So
Hmm.
having but when you're talking about a fighting game, you really, I think, want to focus on the four buttons. So you kind
Hmm.
of have to limit yourself to a point, I think, to, mostly what you do is with the four buttons, the four main
Hmm.
buttons.
Yeah. And I think another aspect of this, in terms of like I guess again, like where you can go with beat 'em ups, is that a lot of what we saw with Fight and Rage, it really isn't that button heavy of a beat 'em up. A lot of the depth of that game really comes down to how well you can chain combos together and kind of just doing as much as you can with like only like two or three buttons.
Yeah, when I played that, I would, take my character, I forget her name, uh,
I think it was just Gal.
Gal. Yeah, it was Gal. I would take her and I would just get airborne and just stay airborne. I would be
Hmm.
up in the air comboing for, like 20, 30 seconds before I'd hit the ground is
Hmm.
is freaking awesome.
Yeah. And because of like it wasn't as button heavy, and then you could kind of focus on the gameplay, and that's one of the things that I'm just not a huge fan of when it comes to the fighting game genre that we'll talk about next. But the key with beat 'em ups, I think what makes them work again is their simplicity and controls. Even stuff like River City Girls, and there's another one that I play that's even more of an RPG beat 'em up. You don't want to overwhelm the player with buttons. You don't want them to be kind of trying to remember, okay, what special move do I have attached? Or how do I pull off this move? It should be as seamless as possible.
Yeah, you don't want to be thinking about what button to press. You want to know what you want to do and instinctively do it
Hmm. So,
because you need to be focused on the gameplay and not
mhm.
on your hands
And all the
coordinating.
enemies that are coming at you, too.
Yeah, yeah, your focus needs to be on the screen, not on what your hands are doing.
Hmm.
So you need to, focus there. And when you're talking about a fighting game kind of thing, your focus is on your hands, not the what's going on the screen.
Hmm. So, another aspect, as we said, in terms of kind of like the beat 'em up genre, is trying to figure out more ways to challenge the player. One of my favorite, but still kind of polarizing examples was Way of the Passive Fist. That it had a great theme, loved the difficulty modifiers in that game, a really great example of using difficulty as both a form of accessibility and a form of challenge. But it's not really a beat 'em up in the same vein as every other example that we can think of.
Yeah, like I personally, like I would say I felt about mad about that game,
Hmm.
but like I love the difficulty things.
Hmm.
The reason why I felt it was mad is because it was focused on the one thing I hate in kind of thing, and the one of the key reasons why I don't play a lot of different games, not just beat 'em ups, but any game that has this kind of thing. The reason why I don't play Dark Souls is because it was reaction based. You had
Hmm.
to block, you had to time stuff, you had to do all this stuff, and I really hate reaction based blocking, parrying, all that kind of stuff. I like
Hmm.
getting out of the way, and that's how you dodge. And when they
Hmm.
build a reaction based thing, that means they normally nerf the heck out of being able to get out of the way, and I just sit there and take damage, and at that point, there's no point in trying. Just go in there and slash, 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 because if you can't win that way, I'm not going to win, kind of thing. Because I can't move out of the way to dodge, and I can't do the reflex thing. And what was the name of the game? Without even pacifist, it was very much
Yeah.
focused on the reflex based, and that's just not my kind of game. When
Hmm.
anything with reflex based defense.
Yeah, I'm not a fan when your character is where you expect your character to have to dodge out of the way of attacks, but they're so slow or so stilted that's not really possible. That was one of the complaints about Streets of Rage 4 that I had. That there were circumstances where there was literally no way you were going to dodge an attack coming at you.
Hmm.
And we do see platforming in a lot of beat 'em ups, and that's a good segue into one point I wanted to bring up, and that is, of course, Battletoads. When we talk about, again, trying to diversify beat 'em ups, Battletoads is the quintessential example and what a lot of people consider to be both the best and the worst case of this. Because Battletoads is considered a beat 'em up only by the fact that you punch people. But it's also a platformer. It's also a racing game. It can have puzzles in it. It can have speed challenges.
Yeah. I mean, everybody loves Turbo Tunnel.
Oh yes.
That's the
Uh,
best part of the game.
hmm Unless you are the YouTuber TMR who did it blindfolded.
You need to do it blindfolded.
There we go. Exactly. And I should do it drunk too.
Yeah, blindfolded and drunk.
There. And the reason why I bring up Battletoads is that when we talk about or when we complain about not having diversity in terms of levels or variety in that respect, Battletoads has variety, to spare. Almost every stage is a completely different design. But again, it raises that problem of who is that game appealing to? Because it's not really a beat 'em up. There's a platforming sections. And this one is that we talk about when it comes to that risks of mixing genres or design elements. That the more you mix, the more niche that audience becomes. Because it's not just you being a fan of beat 'em ups. You gotta be a fan of beat 'em ups, platformers, racing, speed sections. I'm sure they could throw a stealth section at some point too.
What would that be? Uh, Solid Toad?
Mm-hmm. There you go. And it becomes harder to keep people invested when you're changing your genre left and right.
Mm-hmm. That's one of the dangers of mixing genres. That's the reason why Josh and I have said multiple times, you should stick to a single genre unless you really know what you're doing design wise, which means
Mm-hmm.
that more than likely you have had at least one commercial success at that point. And
Mm-hmm.
even then, you need to be confident that you know what you're doing, even then. And there's a whole lot of, merged genre games that I want to make, and I've worked on designs, and I think they will probably work. But I will not do them, because I have not gotten enough experience that I think that I'd be too afraid to do one, and even at my level kind of thing. So, be sure that you are absolutely ready before you start mixing genres.
Yep. You don't want to be saying to yourself, "Oh, I didn't think it would be that hard to make a beat 'em up game mixed with a horror game or a space sim meets an RPG." They're just easy. You take one, you take the other one, you put them together, and you're done, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There is nothing you have to worry about
Just need
meshing.
that game design glue.
Yeah.
We should start selling game design glue. Mix genres easily.
I mean that we should collab with that and make that our first sellable product.
Yeah.
We'll go buy a bunch of glue sticks from Hobby Lobby or wherever and buy them in bulk and then put a label over them.
Sell them for $20 a piece. Will be good.
Yeah, exactly.
There we go. I'm trying to think there's anything else in terms of beat 'em ups. We've talked about enemies. Um, I guess
We
what are
didn't talk
your
about too much about variety of enemies.
yeah,
You know,
like
like when you're talking about enemy variety, I know a lot of beat 'em ups have colored variants kind of thing.
hmm
And this is both a good thing and a bad thing, depending on which game did it. Because some games, all they did was a color variant, and that was it. There
hmm
was nothing different between them, and that was really bad. Some of them did a color variant, and it just had higher stats. This was
hmm
also bad, but not as bad as the previous one. You want to add more differences to that character. Like, give them like a new move that is just for them kind of thing. Like say the first say the first one's a green one kind of thing. The green one has two different moves, right? Or three different
hmm
moves or whatever. We'll say three. So the next one, the red one, it has four moves now. The same three plus a fourth new one. And then you get the last one, the blue one kind of thing, and this one has five moves. The three original, the fourth that the red one
hmm
had, and one special to it kind of thing. And this will add different strategies to fighting these characters as long as you make that extra move legitimately different. It can't be too similar to the other original three moves. But
hmm
if you do stuff like this kind of thing, and you increase your stats on top of that, then you have an enemy that feels legitimately different. And if you want to go even more different, even more better kind of thing, on top of all that, don't just make it a color change, make it an outfit change. This one's wearing shorts and this one's wearing pants. And this one's wearing, a tutu, or something,
hmm
you know, this
And
one,
I would also say to advise be careful of designing enemies that have auto counters or auto moves. Like that was the thing with Streets of Rage 4. Like one of the enemies got the ability that if you would jump anywhere near them, they would auto counter that air attack. You want to avoid guarantees like that. Because if an enemy can only be killed one way, that greatly reduces all your other available tactics to it.
mm-hmm. And like maybe an auto counter to just one specific move kind of thing or one set of moves like auto counter a jump kick but don't auto counter a jump punch or a
hmm
some kind of special move that requires jumping kind of thing.
hmm
If you do something like that, then yeah, it's not so limiting because you're just eliminating one move, not everything in the air.
hmm Yeah, to Farn's comment, I remember there was a game, I think it was a Spider-Man arcade game back in the day that what they did was they would transition between beat 'em up and platforming sections. And it kind of became like almost like two different gameplay systems. And that may be the route to go because again, it becomes harder to put everything together unless you focus on one specific design. Again, kind of like what they did with Battletoads, that when you're doing the turtle tunnel sections, you're not worrying about fighting. You're worrying about maneuvering your bike or the spaceship and Battletoads and Double Dragon.
I think you could if you were a good designer and you had the experience to combine genres and all that stuff. I think you could legitimately combine them because I mean we see that combined at some points in games like Streets of Rage and other beat 'em ups. Like that one map with all the balls that are swinging back and forth. You had to
hmm
there was this ball swinging over a pit that had a I think it had a small little thin bridge kind of thing, or did it have a hole in it? I know some of them had a hole in it, some of
Yeah.
them didn't. But like there was platforming there in that aspect kind of thing. And I think you could do something like that and integrate that instead of just in one part all the way throughout the game. But you would have to be careful on that. Again, that's the reason why I emphasize having experience at this. Because if you implement it too much or too often, kind of thing, then you're going to be requiring far more of a niche.
Hmm.
And you don't want to niche yourself out to where you can't make a profit,
Yeah.
no matter how successful you are. Where Nintendo couldn't even make a profit from it. You know what I mean? You don't want to niche yourself so low that Nintendo can't make a profit from it.
Hmm. And let's see, there's
And that's
anything
kind of where
else.
Battletoads are.
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah, and that's another point. Like when you're doing like the kind of like that three-dimensional plane of a beat 'em up, it becomes a lot harder sometimes to gauge where you're at perspective-wise. Yeah, and like to Foreign's comment, it can become OP. Like if you can just double jump over every enemy, well, it becomes kind of hard to get stuck in a corner or get into a bad position.
Yeah.
And you need to be really careful about how your character can be moved and kind of how you can tell where positioning is. Like we've seen some BMOs where it becomes very hard to tell. Like maybe my character is here and the enemy is like there, and I can't punch him, and that
Yeah.
becomes
That's
so
a
annoying.
that's a hitbox
Hmm.
issue because several of the beat 'em ups have this very small hitbox kind of thing where the more the better ones have a wider hitbox so that you can if the character
Hmm.
is remotely lined up you'll hit.
Yeah, and you don't want it to be like if I can punch, like my punch range is like my little finger here, but then the enemy's punch range is like my taller finger or my index finger, because it gets to that point where the enemy can start punching me before I can start punching them.
I mean that's fine for certain enemies, like you have an
Hmm.
enemy with a long staff kind of thing,
Hmm.
and you're there with your fist. We see that in Streets of Rage towards the later levels when they have those pike like spear
Hmm.
weapons,
Yeah,
and then you quickly jump kick those weapons out of them,
yeah.
and then grab them for yourself, and then go to tap.
Hmm. Yeah, and you have to again be mindful of just what your defensive and offensive actions are in a beat 'em up. And I guess one final point, and I think we'll move on to fighting games because we're approaching about an hour now, is when it comes to like supers or special moves. I think Fight and Rage had like the best compromise. That your special meter is always charging. When it's full, you get one free super, but you can use those special or those super moves anytime at the cost of health.
Mm-hmm. One thing we roughly hit on, but we haven't fully talked about though, is weapons.
Hmm.
Some beat 'em ups have it where weapons are something you can find, pick up, and use, kind of thing, and other beat 'em ups have weapons built into the characters, like TMNT. That mech one.
Hmm.
Several of them have that, and you can either tie weapons to the style of how the person is fighting, or you can, you know, make it where basically everybody fights with their hands and fists and whatnot, feet, and then they can pick up gear and use that, equip the weapons and have, oftentimes very limited use out of them.
Hmm.
What's your preferred method there on that? Do you have one?
You mean between having it be a consumable versus just having like the character naturally built that way?
Yeah.
I like the I like the natural style because it gives you a little bit more diversity. Like again, like going from a character like Blaze in Streets of Rage to someone like Axel or not Axel Max, who has just a far longer punch, but of course is compensating for being a little bit slower in that respect.
Yeah. So you would rather have like a sword that has reach
Hmm.
rather than, like, so you would rather have it like the kind of Ninja Turtles kind of did it,
Yeah. Or
where,
that again that mech game.
yeah, there's a few others that do that as well.
Hmm.
That's what I want to do in mine, the one I've been working on, because I want to have the weapons be like a very big part of kind of their move sets kind of thing. Where
Hmm.
you would think, a character with like a Buster Sword would be very slow, but he'd have massive reach and massive damage kind of thing. Where you know a character with maybe a fencing sword kind of thing would be super like would probably have like a dash attack kind of thing, and like they would be very pinpoint kind of thing in their moves kind of thing. Where like somebody with like a dagger would be like super fast and not a lot of damage, but because they just have like attack speed out there yin yang kind of thing, they just do like massive damage. And maybe they have
Hmm.
two of them, and somebody
Hmm.
with like twin swords or something would be very much like the twin daggers but slower.
Yeah.
They wouldn't be, but they would have massive damage between the two swords more so than the twin daggers.
Yeah. What do you think about beat 'em ups that restrict defensive options based on the character? Such as one character can actually dash out of the way, another character can only jump. Maybe somebody else has kind of like a little like roll that they can do. Like, do you think like defensive options should be standardized, or do you like having it be different based on the character?
Uh, I think it depends on
Hmm.
the actual game itself and the enemy design, because if the enemy design is going to punish, is set to punish one set defensive object, then you don't have a defensive object.
Hmm.
Where if the game is not set to punish any of those, it it could be good, but like it would all depend on controls kind of thing. If they're all pressing the exact same button to do their defensive option,
Hmm.
then you have this universal control that no matter which character you're playing, this is your defense button, you kind of thing.
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
if it's a different button for every character, that would be really bad. So like if it had uniform controls, enemies didn't punish on it kind of thing, it could be, but not necessarily a good thing.
Hmm.
But if it had any of the other stuff, it would be bad.
Hmm.
Absolutely.
I think Form was talking about just like if you give the character two main movement options, then it becomes too easy to get in and out of danger. I think that's what he was referring to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that you can still give them a lot of movement, but you would have to design the game around having that. You
Hmm.
couldn't just give that to, you couldn't just give double jump to like, one of the characters in TMNT and be fine, because then you would be, way more powerful than them. But if you
Hmm.
design the game around you having double jump to begin with, then you could, legitimately make a, thing for it, because now maybe the
Hmm.
enemies have double jump as well, maybe maybe they can get away from you the same way you can get away from them.
Yeah.
Maybe they have specific counters for your double jump kind of thing. Not necessarily they're going to hit you, but they're going to be able to, you know, uh, block it or get out of the way somehow, you know,
Hmm.
or reduce damage because, those certain enemies can know that's coming. It all depends on if the game is built around it, because the what's important is the things meshing together, not necessarily the specific things. So like just adding that onto something that already exists would be bad.
Yeah.
But if everything's purposely built around it and everything meshes together, then it could be very good.
Hmm.
I mean, we see that in Fight and Rage because Fight and Rage has like an infinite jump,
Yeah, you keep bouncing off of enemies. You never touch the ground.
and
And
that game is built around that. Of course, part
hmm
of the thing they did built around that is they fill the whole entire stage with enemies. There's not like three,
hmm
four, five, six enemies like you would have in Fight and Rage, or Streets of Rage. There's like what 40, 50 enemies on screen at a time on like Fight and Rage. Oftentimes,
hmm
it's just
and
all over.
and they can get away with that. And the fact that you have like those bulldogs who can just like punch you from across the room is that if you're ever in trouble, you can pull off your special move, and that grants you iframes. It even allows you to cancel out of an enemy's attack.
hmm And it's all
And
about the game design being built around the movement
yeah,
tech.
and something that Shark said a minute ago that I want to expand on about keeping options or abilities kind of standardized, so that if I press the Y button for one character, it's his punch. It should be the same thing for another character. It should be their punch attack. That's one of the things that always gets me for a lot of fighting or for a lot of fighting
Or
games.
punch equivalent attack.
Yeah, that it doesn't feel like they're standardized controls. And I think that is a good segue into fighting games, unless there's anything else you want to mention for beat 'em ups.
No, I think we pretty much covered it.
Hmm. Okay. So the fighting genre, as we said, is arguably the more popular of the two. We're talking about beat 'em ups versus fighting games. But the fighting genre itself is still on the niche side compared to some of the breakout hits. And a lot of that, I think, is the technical aspect of them. That so much of what goes into a lot of fighting games, especially the more popular ones, your Dragon Ball Fighter Z, MK11, Street Fighter, Blaze Blue, and those kind of games, is that there's far more elements under the surface as opposed to a beat 'em up. In a beat 'em up, you punch, you jump, you kick, or you do a special. In a fighting game, you have your normal attacks, you have special attacks, you have character specific combos, you have ultras, you have different meters, you have
Your
advanced tech.
fatalities.
Yep. You have advanced tech, like being able to push an enemy away. You have throw cancel. You have throw defense. You have a combo canceling, special move canceling. Uh,
Fatalities.
yep. You have all those different aspects that are in like Dragon Ball, like in an Arc System Works fighting game. On top of that,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of that stuff is just like non-intuitive. If you've never, even if you've played a few fighting games before, like there's a lot that I still have no idea even how to remember that.
Yeah. Like, a lot of fighting games go the way of DDR. It's a quarter turn frontwards AB forward slash .com hyphen and that's how you pull up the attack. It's like those buttons
Hmm.
aren't even on my controller. I know you got to hit the keyboard too.
And you should get a drum pedal too, so you have to hit that on top of it.
Yeah. It's like now you got to hit like like 8 buttons on your controller, and then hit like 3 or 4 buttons on your keyboard. You
Hmm.
know, it's 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 like one of those things where it's hard to not hit Control F4.
Yeah,
you know,
but
it's very very complicated in a lot of their movements.
yeah, and for the longest time, special moves had like no rhyme or reason to how they were programmed. Okay, reuse fireball, down a quarter circle forward punch. Somebody else's fireball could be quarter circle backwards kick. Okay, what's the rationale for that? Nobody knows.
Yeah, and a lot of games are still like that.
Hmm. It really wasn't until I think Mortal Kombat 10 that I think Another Realm finally started to standardize and streamline their special moves.
Although they were not the first to do that. The
Hmm.
first that I know, the first and only that I know that truly streamlined it would be Soul Calibur. And that's
Hmm.
the one and only fighting game I really, really love because I love some Soul Calibur 4, some Soul Calibur 2,
Yeah.
some Soul Calibur 3.
Azeroth was my main in Soul Calibur 2, and I think maybe 3 or 4. Where was the other one that I played?
The My favorite was I forget his how do you say his name, Mitzer,
Mitsugi?
something like that.
The samurai guy.
Yeah, yeah, I loved him. You know, he was
Hmm.
awesome. And the great thing is every move in that game is coordinated with what you're actually doing on the screen, and it had that, you
Hmm.
know, a lot of the, you know, like aspect, the intuitiveness of a beat 'em up kind of thing,
Yeah.
to
One
where
thing. Oh, go ahead.
you hit punch the punch button and you punch,
Hmm.
or slice with your sword or slice with your dagger or whatever it is, kind of thing. And
Yeah.
that goes across all characters, no matter what weapon they have.
Yeah.
You hit forward and punch, and now you're doing this extra, you know, forward movement when you do a punch, or, you know, slice with your sword or whatever. You're doing this forward charge. Or if you hit down forward and then you hit that same button, now you're doing this like sweep, or
Hmm.
downward slice. And then if you hit down and doing that, now you're doing like a crouch and slice at the ankles kind of thing.
Yeah. Wait, so if you press down and punch, that doesn't mean you do a jump kick?
No. And if you hit like up and punch, now you're doing this like either like upper slice or, you know, cut or, you know, punch or whatever it is. And if you push up in it, you know, now you're doing like maybe an uppercut or like a, you know, direct slice up or anything like that. And it's like, and it goes across all characters kind of thing. And like, you know, there's a whole thing for the backwards too. And it was very intuitive that all the characters were exactly the same in that, but the feel of everything was completely different because everybody had different weapons, different styles of fighting. So all of that went fine. And then they had all that for like every single button. And then they had
Yeah.
a few other moves that were special moves, but they were not hard to pull off kind of thing. You didn't have to do a Dance Dance Revolution, you know, to where you had to
Hmm.
do, you know, like three circles around the controller, you know,
Oh yeah, like the
find a
Zangief crazy move.
Rosie in the garden and you know, fall down with the shoots and ladders. I mean, you didn't have to
Mhm.
do that. You do have to do that in Mortal Kombat, but you don't have to do that in Soul Calibur. It's just a very simple kind of
Hmm.
thing. And the intuitiveness and being able to, you know, like, you don't have to memorize, quote unquote, a move set. You just have to be able to fight. And if you're
Yeah.
able to fight, then you're able to fight. You know, in Soul
Hmm.
Calibur, where, you know, if you have the fighting tactics, you can play Soul Calibur. Where, you know,
Hmm.
fighting tactics will get you very, very little in a Mortal Kombat or anything else because
There's so
you
much advanced tech
you
there.
got to have the memorization. And I wouldn't
Yeah.
even say it's more advanced because, like, I think Soul Calibur literally had more moves than like a Mortal Kombat does because, like,
Yeah.
they had, you know, all these specific moves, but, you know, every character would only have like 8 specific moves or something like that, and then they'd have like, you know, a few basic stuff, you know, where, like, you know, there's like 8 stuff you can pull off with one button, 9 stuff because you can hit the one button, do the default thing, or do one direction and do, you know, that same button, and you have 9 moves there, and
Hmm.
they have that for all 4 buttons kind of thing. So there's like 36 moves right there.
Yeah. And another thing, like Soul Calibur did, that I don't think any other fighting games did, was that there was a difference between tapping an attack button and tap and hold. Like I remember with Astaroth, like if you do like a horizontal swing with his axe, and you just tap the button, he just goes like that. If you tap and hold, he'll go in for the hit and kind of fake the attack and charge up for a different move. And I'm surprised more fighting games didn't do like the tap versus hold in terms of special moves.
Yeah, I forgot about those. You could do the same thing on all the
Hmm.
characters because you could do like like kind of a
Yeah.
fake thing with uh my guy. I'm just going to call him Mitsu, and
Hmm.
and you could do that where he would spin for the sword and then he would miss, kind of thing, and he would keep on spinning around and then he
Hmm.
would spin around a second time and just hit you really hard.
Yeah. And don't forget like the crazes of Voldo, whatever his style was.
Oh God, Waldo style. I hate it.
Hmm. Like the closest I think comparison in terms of a fighting game to Soul Calibur could arguably be a Virtual Fighter. Like Virtual Fighter didn't really do special moves in that same way, but it didn't seem as intuitive to me when I played it.
Hmm. I didn't
And
really
like
play much of that.
and the same probably goes for Tekken as well. Like again, like Tekken, Virtual Fighter, and even like yeah, I think Tekken and Virtual Fighter are I think very momentum driven fighting games. Like if you get the enemy, like I've seen people who like they will perfect you in about 10 seconds if you let them. And then in the very next round, they could maybe not even get a hit in if you're the one who kind of gets that opening hand.
Yeah, and I know that when you're talking about like maybe appealing to a
Fire.
appealing to the market kind of thing,
Hmm.
the spectacle from like Mortal Kombat's moves, I think, is what really, kind of accelerates it in that sense. Because like
Hmm.
there's just so many, so much spectacle in, Scorpion getting out there and get over here.
Hmm. But I would also say that for like the professional or the hardcore fighting game fans, they really like the I think the complexity side of things. Like, if you look at something like the Power Rangers fighting game, Arc System Works, Dragon Ball Fighting Z, and Marvel vs. Capcom, those are games where you can just like lock somebody down. Like if you get them in like the corner or you get them in a off position, they can't do a damn thing to you.
But you can do
And
the
like,
same thing in Soul Calibur.
mhm. But like in like Dragon Ball Fighting Z, like I saw people like at the professional levels like hit the enemy up, that enemy never touched the ground again. Like they will just keep comboing and going to assist, and the second player just doesn't even get a word in at that point.
Yeah, you can in Soul Calibur, you can just knock somebody over into a corner and then do the sweeping slash attack and over and just trip them as they're getting up, kind
Hmm.
of thing. Now there is a way out of that,
Hmm.
but you know it's something that it's you have to do a block, but you have to do it timed specifically to their attack, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And if you might be able to hold it, but that doesn't quote unquote get you out of it completely. That just gets you where you're no longer taking damage and you're still kind of pigeonholed, kind of thing. And now what do? You're at a
To
stalemate.
to Mike's question, aren't you like aren't you able to move between planes in Soul Calibur, or am I misremembering? Like, I
You're
remember there were attacks that you could kind of like attack and like move at the same time.
no, but you could attack and knock somebody over to a different map
Mm.
section, sort of like you do with Mortal Kombat.
Mm.
But you couldn't, um, wait a minute. I think one or a few. No,
Mm.
I'm. I'm thinking they might have actually had it, at least in some of them. I don't think they had it in all of them, but I think they may have had it in some of them where you can move sideways.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm fogging up on my memory. I can't remember.
Hmm. Yeah, I
I
know
think
there's
they
been
might
a.
have had that in five.
Hmm. Yeah, I know like maybe like the older Mortal Kombat, like the first and 3D Mortal Kombat games, did allow you kind of like move like in and out of the plane, but it
Oh,
was.
I remember now. You couldn't directly move out of the plane, but you could hit a button, which I think was one of the triggers to move to the different plane.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what it was. You couldn't, yourself move to that, but you could do a like a side dash or whatever with the with the shoulder buttons and get to a different plane.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what it was.
And like with like the fighting game, like in terms of like the technical aspect of it, it's also one of the reasons why onboarding has been, I think, one of the biggest killers for a lot of the mainstream fighting games. That it's like, okay, press this button to punch. Okay, press this button to kick. Okay, now hold down left button while pressing punch, kick, grab to initiate the assist move, and then press a punch, kick, jump in order to activate your hyper mode. And then while you're in hyper mode, now every special move can be hit with a double input to do quadruple damage.
Yeah, and that's that's getting into DDR kind of stuff
Hmm.
there, and that's also getting into uh the old cheat codes. Back in the day, where like you go to the menu screen, push the Konami code, and now you can do it.
Hmm. And I think this is one.
Ironically, I don't think it's Konami games that had the those kind of moves in it.
Mhm. And I think the problem for me is that I'm fine with, punch, high punch, low punch, or, punch, kick, jump, and whatever. But when you start having everything be like added to modifiers and the shoulder buttons or shortcuts, that it just loses any sense of being intuitive.
Hmm.
Unless you spend, several hundred hours building that muscle memory.
Yeah, and that's the kind of thing I do not like. That's the reason
Hmm.
why I bounce off of almost every fighting game that is not Soul Calibur.
Yeah. Like it's not about so much fighting the opponent, it's about memorizing what your combos are. And that was one of the things that just drove me nuts about a lot of about like Mortal Kombat and other fighting games, where you can do a combo, but if you don't do the specific combos pre-programmed in by a developer, your character stops.
Hmm.
Or the other point, when it's not tied to animation, it's tied to button pressing, and this is what we usually see in like kind of animation or button or input buffering. That if I do punch, punch, kick, and I'm timing my those button presses to the animation of the character, as soon as I see the punch thrown, I then throw the other punch. That doesn't work. Instead, I have to do punch, punch, kick before those animations are even triggered, so that they're automatically buffered to their next hit. And to me, that just it doesn't work with my brain.
Yeah, doesn't work with mine either. The the only kind of moves that I'm really able to pull off in like a Mortal Kombat or something like that is like the quarter turn forward and a button, quarter turn backwards and a button kind of thing. Which was Scorpion's I think the quarter turn forward and a button was Scorpion's get over here attack.
Hmm.
And I think that was also Sub Zero's ice
Hmm.
Kamehameha thing.
Yep. And
And but like if it wasn't one of those two special moves, I was stuck with just basic moves essentially because I just couldn't do pretty much anything else.
Hmm.
Like I would try the, like the full circle stuff, but it's like you didn't enter it fast enough, you didn't enter it accurately enough
Oh
or
God.
something, and it's like, how the hell do you even do that?
Yeah, like I could never pull off playing Zangief in Street Fighter with, full 360.
yeah,
Yeah. And this has been, I think, one of the bottlenecks for a lot of the fighting games. Like I don't even dare touch stuff like Blaze Blue. What was the other one? Like the other Arc Knights one with the only thing I remember about was that the main villain's name is Soul Bad Guy.
I don't know.
Guilty Gear, that's it. Like I don't even dare touch like the Guilty Gear game.
Yeah, like those two games interested me, with their aesthetics and everything, but I
Mm-hmm.
don't touch them. I want to touch them, but I don't.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. Last Guilty Gear. Oh, here's a point. Guilty Gear, for being very popular, it sits at 14,000 reviews on Steam, the latest one.
They're
Yeah,
very
like
niche.
Arc. Yeah, like Arc System Works has definitely gotten like they've kind of cornered the market on technical fighting games.
Hmm.
I mean, like the Dragon Ball Fighter Z one that we played. My whole stretch of that was just keep mashing buttons and hope that something worked.
And then you
Like it
beat
just
all of us.
yeah, with 20 minutes of practice or 500 hours, right?
Yeah, you put 500 hours in before you played us.
Hmm. And again, like it just doesn't feel intuitive to me when I play a fighting game, and I don't know what would be the solution to that. Like,
I believe that night, I think I was the closest one to beating you.
yeah,
It wasn't that close, but I think it was the closest.
yeah. And like it's a tough problem for fighting games because again, we are limited to 8 main buttons on a gamepad. Of course, again, you could get a fight stick, but how many people are going to buy a professional grade fight stick just to try out a fighting game?
Not many.
And again, I think we've seen like very, very small steps forward in this respect when it comes to the fighting game genre. With again trying to standardize move sets in MK11 and Injustice 2. But again, it still feels like too much of the depth of playing those games is about memorization versus the actual playing of them.
Yeah, it's not really depth, it's just complexity.
Hmm.
And, you know, I've always said I hate complexity, I love depth.
Hmm.
Now the
And
two are very much parallels to each other, but
mhm,
they're not on the same track because like you can have depth without complexity, you can have depth with complexity, you can also have, complexity without depth and depth, every different
mhm,
way. But generally when you have one, you have the other, but not always. Because
mhm,
like a good a good designer would try to eliminate all the complexity and leave the depth, where a bad designer would have no depth and just
mhm,
complexity and think he's good.
yeah. And again, when you're trying to teach someone these elements, it I just wonder like how many fighting games get playtesting from non-fighting game players.
Soul Calibur.
Hmm.
That's probably it.
But like the best tutorial I think still stands with Skullgirls in terms of trying to onboard someone. It was still, complex as hell, but at least they explained it in a way that was at least a little bit easier to grasp.
Mm-hmm.
And the MK11 tutorial was also good, but again, a good tutorial with overly complicated design, it can only do so much.
Yeah. When you look at the history of designers kind of thing, the bad designers you often see in their games lots of complexity and no depth. Where with the good designers, you see lots of depth and no complexity, kind of thing.
Hmm.
So you have that. It's pretty obvious which way you want to go. You want to go for depth and not complexity. You want to avoid complexity and get depth as much as
Hmm.
possible, and that's hard. That's the hardest way to do. It's very easy to make something very complex.
Hmm.
I mean, you can do a platforming game where to jump you have to hit 360 circle around the controller. A B 4. Then
Double
the
tap
Konami
up
code,
while
and then
pressing A.
yeah,
I know. Oh no, better yet, double tap up while pressing punch in order to jump. Because, that makes perfect sense. That won't require rewiring your brain.
just enter the Konami code to jump.
Hmm. And I think the problem that fighting games have had is that they always feel like they're competing between the hardcore and the core and the casual audience. That anything that makes the hardcore people happy kind of pushes back the non-hardcore. And anything that makes the non-hardcore people happy, the hardcore people hate.
Well, I don't think that's necessarily true, but I think that's mostly true. I think the reason for that is hardcore people get used to the complexity, and
Hmm.
now they think that the complexity is a quote unquote skill.
You mean
And,
get good?
yeah, and complexity, dealing and learning how to deal with complexity is not a skill. That's called masochism.
Hmm.
And masochism is not a skill. It's the ability to suffer without quitting. And
Yeah.
that's not skill. And so, but they equate it to skill. So anytime you're getting rid of that complexity that they're used to, that requires no skill on their part because they've already memorized it through all their masochism,
Hmm.
you get rid of that, and it makes it where other people that don't have that masochism can compete
Or
against them, and
thousands of hours.
now they're quote unquote worse players, and now they're like, no, I don't want to be a worse player. Make them go through all the masochism of memorizing and getting through all the complexity
Mhm.
the same way I had to. Make them earn it. Make them
Yep.
suffer the same way I had to suffer, so that I can stay good until that point.
Yeah.
And
And as a big example of this, the fighting genre has probably been, or fighting game fans have probably been one of the most vocal against any kind of character customization, character augmentations, things like that. And what I mean by that is that when you look at like Injustice and MK11, in MK11, if you're not playing competitively, you can choose different styles or different moves. So you can create like your own version of Johnny Cage or your own version of Scorpion. When you're doing it competitively, you are locked to whatever are kind of like the pre-approved Nether Realm builds for those characters. In Injustice 2, they had this whole, extensive loot box and character customization that you can put different clothing options on that would change, your special move speed or how much damage you could do. And of course, for competitive play, that is entirely turned off. But if it's turned off for competitive play, then that means for anyone trying to learn a fighting game, all those systems are just null and void. Because if you're going to try and play this, in the quote unquote main mode, you can't do that stuff.
yeah, but that's what I loved about Soul Calibur and the way they did it. Like the
Mhm.
cosmetics and everything, all that stuff had no impact on gameplay or moves or anything like that. That just had where the way you looked, kind of thing. And I had a customized Mitsu that looked just like Bankai Ichigo, and I loved doing that, and and I Bankai Ichigo whooped your butt. That was me. if
Hmm.
if you ever played Soul Calibur 4 and you got your butt whooped by Bankai Ichigo Mitsu, that was probably me.
Yeah. I still think it could be possible to do a fighting game with very light customization. Like you can choose, let's say, two or three specific perks for your character, just to make it a little bit more for you. Kind
Yeah,
of almost
but
like
that
a
would
Dead by
require
Daylight,
a lot of balancing.
of course.
You know,
And and again, I'm sure every hardcore fighting game person would hate that.
yeah, probably.
And it is a tough line to walk again because the fighting game genre, much like the beat 'em up genre, is so established in its design that it's very hard to make waves in it.
I think it's easier to make waves in beat 'em ups than there is in fighting game because
I would agree with that.
fighting game, a lot of people are really hardcore. They have that really hardcore audience in a lot of fighting games.
Hmm.
And I mean, the people who are hardcore into beat 'em ups aren't hardcore in the same way. They're not like, we want the game to be, equally bad for everybody.
It's one more games at
Yeah,
this point.
yeah, they want more games and more good games. Yeah, kind of thing.
Hmm.
Where fighting games, they don't care how many games they get. They just care that every game is equal, is very, very complex and everything. Which makes me think that, Soul Calibur sales are probably much lower than Mortal Kombat and all that others.
Hmm.
Although they appeal more to casual audience, so maybe that also increases their sales. I wonder how that plays out.
Hmm. Yeah, so like Soul Calibur 6, let's see. That is sitting at only about a little over 6,000 reviews.
So that's like a quarter of what Mortal Kombat did, or
Hmm.
maybe even a fifth. Mortal Kombat was what, 30?
Yeah, somewhere around there.
So like a fifth. So like, yeah, a lot of
Yeah.
the hardcore audience does not like the all the goodness that came from Soul Calibur, which is,
Hmm.
in my opinion, the best designed fighting game there is.
Hmm. And what we've seen developers do again to try and have that concession to non-hardcore players has been to bulk up the single player and the offline content. That was one of the big things about Mortal Kombat 11, that it wasn't just this, tournament level esports fighting game. It was this, narrative 8 to 10 hour crazy martial arts story where you can
Hmm.
finally watch characters like talk to each other before they, rip each other's spines out.
Yeah,
It worked. Like that's not a joke. It worked. It pulled in a lot of people who wouldn't have played MK11 otherwise because you can. It's a very similar thing that we saw StarCraft did, with basically saying, "Here's our multiplayer content, here's our single player content, and the two will never mix at all."
yeah, but they're dividing their audience very much in that aspect.
Yeah. But I would say in this case, it kind of works compared to a mixed genre, in that you can have somebody who likes real time strategy games or likes fighting games, but doesn't want to go against a pro esports player. Conversely, you can have somebody who's a pro esports player who doesn't want to play against, the scrubs.
Yeah, but that's where some good matchmaking would come in handy.
Hmm.
Yeah, and such like that. Where you're not you're not pairing noobs and pro players together.
Hmm.
And Mortal Kombat and whatnot don't seem to really have that kind of matchmaking. They just have matchmaking with the first person available kind of thing.
Mm. So we are about an hour. We're getting close to an hour and 40 into the stream, so we should begin to wrap things up.
Hmm.
But do want to dedicate, I think, some time to Smash Brothers. So, is there anything else regarding the other fighting games that we didn't touch on yet that you would like to cover?
I don't think so.
Okay. So, way back at the start of our discussion, Foreign, I think, asked about Smash Brothers. So, we're finally getting to it now. Smash Brothers is, I think, when we look at the fighting game genre, it's very much the oddity of it that no one really expected it to, I think, blow up as much as it did. I think, including Nintendo.
Yeah, but just be Nintendo
Yeah.
or Among Us.
Mm-hmm. And what Smash did, I think, is kind of the subtle genius of it, is that they found a formula that not only greatly streamlines the gameplay of a fighting game, but it also allowed for almost an infinite number of combinations of depth. Because you can take a character like, Ganondorf, and you can take a character like Banjo and Kazooie. They have these literally the same exact controls for all their moves, but they are fundamentally completely different characters.
Just like in Soul Calibur.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say that Smash Brothers is not a fighting game, and it's not a beat 'em up, but it is an offshoot genre. It's its own genre. It's
Mm-hmm.
I guess you'd call it a smash 'em up or a smashing game or something. Whatever
Mm-hmm.
you want to call it. But like there is so much in common between it and a fighting game, just like there's so much in common between a fighting game and a beat 'em up, in the fact
Mm-hmm.
that almost everything's the same. The big change is the how flashy slash explosive the moves are, the
Mm-hmm.
move types, the sheer quantity of characters,
Mm-hmm.
the fact that you play with four players, and the fact of the little bit of focus on plate forming here with the ringing out and all this other stuff, as well as the 2 meters. You have the 1 meter that is you know preventing you from recovering, and then you have the other meter that actually kills you,
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing. And the the meshing there is like so very similar, but yet just a little bit of change, and it's vastly different. Just
Yeah.
like the change from beat 'em up to a fighting game, it's its own thing, but it is right in the parallels with both fighting games and beat 'em ups. And
Yeah. And what's
I
very
honestly don't haven't seen any good examples that were not Smash Brothers. I've seen some examples that people really like that were not
mm-hmm.
Smash Brothers, but like I
if
don't think they worked.
If Thorne was watching, he would be mentioning Rivals of Ether.
And that would be when I would say it doesn't work. I know the developers of that game.
And like, what's ironic, I guess, in a way for Smash Brothers is that as the franchise has gone on, they've been doing more to court casual fans rather than hardcore ones. Like when you look at stuff like the Subspace Emissary mode from what was it, the Wii U version of Smash. Like that was just an insane story that is just basically like 100% Nintendo fan service taken to the extreme. And like all the hardcore players are like, I don't want to do that. But like all of us, we stood around to watch, Kirby beat up what was it, Ganondorf.
Mm,
Because we all know Kirby is considered like the most overpowered character in the universe.
yep. And Ganondorf, the most overpowered one in Nintendo's villains.
I'm not sure who that would be, but I mean, again, like it's been I think considered canonical or canon that Kirby is just it. Like there's no counter to Kirby. He's just unstoppable.
Yeah, he's the ditto of Nintendo franchises.
Yeah.
because he is very much parallel to Ditto but Ditto without the nerf, because Ditto, when he copies somebody, he got a stat debuff kind of thing in Pokemon. But when Kirby copies somebody, he
Hmm.
buffs him. He doesn't debuff him, he buffs him.
Yeah. And with Smash Brothers, from a design standpoint, again, it is such a, like as Shark says, like a niche within a niche in terms of its mechanics that we've seen people try and imitate. Like there's that Nickelodeon one that people were talking about excitedly for like 2 months before it came out, and then nobody has said a word about it since.
Yeah.
There's the Sony version of it that came out like a few years ago that also people were excited about, and then it never was heard from again. So I
Hmm.
guess, do you think that it's the design that attracts people, or do you think it's more the IP?
That I don't know.
Because again,
I,
like there are hardcore people, like there is a super high level play of Smash. If you
oh
watch,
yeah.
what was it, Evo matches at like the Grand Master of Smash Brothers, they are crazy in terms of their gameplay.
Yeah, I know one of my old friends used to be one of those people who went to Evo and stuff like that
Hmm.
and participated in the tournaments and whatnot, and he placed pretty good. And
Hmm.
that was back in the early 2000s kind of thing. That was a while ago.
Yeah, and spoiler alert for me, like you won't be seeing me placing an Evo anytime soon.
Well, you now you've got to place an Evo, but you've got to do it blindfolded and handcuffed.
Just give me some game design glue and I can do it.
Yeah, we'll have to make some and give it to you.
Hmm. It'll be the new gamer fuel.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
don't
and
sniff the glue.
no. Yeah, and I think IP does have a very big factor to it. I mean, you can see all the amiibos, and those aren't even all my amiibos behind me right there. Like Nintendo, again, Nintendo is Nintendo. Like they are always like the exception to almost like any rule that we talk about.
Yeah, Nintendo is the IP king
Hmm.
and queen and prince and princess
And Princess, yeah.
and jester. They're all of them.
Hmm. But like the Smash design, I think it still is that very weird place where it stands. Because, like we said, there is super high level play that I still don't know if Nintendo actually acknowledges in terms of the onboarding of playing Smash.
Hmm. I assume they don't because they don't really acknowledge even internet exists most of the time.
Hmm. Do you have internet access? Do you have a phone?
They don't. Nintendo can't play Blizzard games.
Yeah. But I do think with a lot of these fighting games, that IP really does matter. That there's a reason why Dragon Ball Fighter Z and Mortal Kombat 11 are considered like the tops of the genre compared to some of the other ones.
Don't forget about Marvel vs. Capcom.
Hmm. Wonder how well that Power Rangers game did.
Power Rangers. Yeah, like a lot of these have like really strong IPs. A lot of the fighting games have really
Yeah,
strong IPs.
yeah. Well, I can tell you the Power Rangers did not do all that well. It only has 900 reviews on Steam.
So that was probably pure IP right there.
Probably.
But
But
like,
children play Smash Brothers.
but the like you do see pretty much all IP usage in a fighting game. The only
Hmm.
ones that you don't see with a really specific IP is is DOA,
Hmm.
uh, which they created their own IP, and then you
Yeah,
have Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter, and
yeah.
those really because Blaze Blue and all that stuff is a franchise. Guilty Gear's a franchise.
Killer Instinct.
Yeah. Killer
Yeah,
Instinct created their own,
yeah.
but Killer Instinct also kind of failed.
It is at just under 3,000 reviews on Steam. Um, now we are starting to, I think, get a little bit late. There's two more points I think I really want to make, and then I think I'm gonna stop talking, and then I'll see, and then we'll throw it over to you. Um, the first one, and this is something I've been thinking about a lot. I think one of the major elements of fighting games that has really changed in the last decade has been becoming more PC friendly. Because for the longest time, they were always meant for consoles, because obviously console has a gamepad or more fight stick friendly. And when we did get ports, they were horrible. Like if anyone remembers like the port for Injustice 1 or MK, I think 8 or 9 was pretty bad as well. And I think a lot of kind of trying to grow this market has been releasing them on the PC. Like I didn't hear any. I think there were some complaints about Mortal Kombat 11 at launch on PC, but I think it's been smoothed over a lot since then.
Hmm.
And I guess, do you think that that has been a positive change in terms of trying to get more PC? Like, do you think there is a market for fighting games on the PC?
Yeah, but I think that there's probably more of a market for it on consoles
Mm-hmm.
because consoles has is built in for the controller, where PCs
Mm-hmm.
are not, and playing a fighting game that's not on a controller is like, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So like like not all PC players have controllers. Most of us have controllers, but not
Mm-hmm.
all of us have controllers, and that limits your audience, kind of thing, because they may try your game without a controller, and they're like, yeah, nope,
And
yeah,
hated.
refund, you know,
Mm-hmm.
they will nope right out of there real quick.
Mm-hmm.
But those of us with controllers may not nope out of there real quick. So I
Mm-hmm.
think that there's certainly a stronger market for it on consoles. But I think the strength of the market is also like very heavily reliant on IP when it comes to fighting games, because when we look at the fighting games, almost all of them got the rights to a pre-existing franchise kind of thing to make the fighting game about, except for the people who got in early. Your Mortal
Mm-hmm.
Kombat, your Killer Instinct, and your Virtual Fighter, your Dead or Alive,
Mm-hmm.
all these guys got in early, and it seems like after the early ones got out, you pretty much had to have a franchise, that already existing franchise that you're tying into.
Can you player a fighter? Can you taunt in a splash?
You
And
might
then,
be able to in a fighting game.
hmm and then the final point I want to bring up is supporting these games long term. What are your thoughts on like having like different editions, character updates? Like it feels like very much like a live service game. You do need to update these games at the competitive level to keep people interested.
I think that different editions is always a bad idea,
Mm-hmm.
unless they're just for physical stuff. You don't want to
Mm-hmm.
offer anything digital that somebody can't get later. And you also don't want to add anything digital that is going to cost somebody a lot of money later either.
Mm-hmm.
You want to keep things fair. You want to avoid absolutely pay to win in these games. Although that seems to be the direction they're going, which is
I mean, like the problem is that when you add in new fighters and make them DLC locked or, championship edition locked or whatever,
that's pay to win.
yeah, especially at the esports level where you need to not only know how your character works, but how every other character responds to them.
You need to know that at every level.
Yeah.
But the more professional you are, the more you need to know.
Mm-hmm.
because you get the better you got to be.
Yeah. I don't know if like I think I'm more fine with having DLC characters. Like if you're developing brand new characters 2, 3 years down the line, you know, you can charge for that. Like I'm fine with that. But I'm not fine with having to buy like new editions of your game. Like the Street Fighter 5 when, the Championship Edition, the Turbo Edition, the Super Mega Edition.
The Super Turbo Mega Edition, the
Hmm.
Turbo Super Mega Edition. I don't even know what the difference between all those versions are. Are they just remakes?
I think they change and rebalance some of the underlying systems. But ask me what those changes are, I have no idea.
I thought they were just ports or something.
So here, I just thought of one final question. Do you think it is possible to make a 100% live service fighting game? Akin to something like Warframe or Path of Exile, that completely free but can be supported almost indefinitely with new content, cosmetics, and grow like that.
I think you can, make a live service of anything. You
Hmm.
can make a live service RPG for that matter. The question is, would it be good?
Hmm.
And that's a loaded question. There that
Hmm.
can't be answered very easily. But yeah, I think it can be done. But can it be done well? Possibly.
Hmm.
But that would require a team working on it that is not into abusive monetization practices, which
Hmm.
would be very few of the teams that are out there. So, will it ever happen? Probably not.
Hmm.
Not now. Not in the current market. Not likely. Especially with it being such a small market, such a small niche kind of thing.
Hmm.
Because when you're talking about people that are, want good monetization, those are mostly, the small players in the market, and those are the exact people who would probably die horribly if they got into the fighting game market.
Hmm.
So, yeah, like in the current market, the current way things are set up, I don't think we could get a good version of that. I think we could definitely get a version of it. I think we're going to get a version of it because I think Mortal Kombat, the next Mortal Kombat, may be that because they're
Very
certainly
well
very
be.
much going that way with 11.
Hmm.
But will it be good? Probably not. It'll
Will be
probably be,
approachable as well.
yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
it'll have good aspects to it the same way that 11, Mortal Kombat 11 has good aspects to it. But he also has pay to win aspects and all kinds of other bad aspects. And, I would
Hmm.
say it's definitely a, overall negative experience kind of thing.
Here is a question for you, Shark, as well as for the people watching us live and recorded. What do you consider to be fair price for a new character in a fighting game? Because as I'm working on my free to play build, I'm trying to think about how pricing conventions work in these games. Like, how much would you think is fair for a new character? And when I say new character, I mean, one character, no crazy cosmetics, just, I'm going to design a new character for this game and I'm going to charge you for
Uh, that's a hard one because number one, I don't buy DLC.
it.
And not really anyway. And number two is like a lot of that would be, to even get me to think about paying 1 cent for it, it has to be a legitimate good character that is not pay to win.
Hmm.
It's got to be somebody well balanced with really different moves, kind of thing. Nothing, it can't feel like any of the other characters. It has to be legitimately different, maybe even more different than every other characters, but it can't be better than the other characters, kind of thing. It has to still be balanced. And that on its own is a mission impossible to create character like that.
Hmm.
And most people who are selling characters have no interest in that because that's going to make them make less money. So why would they spend all this extra money to make less money? So that on its own, I don't think would happen. It's not likely to happen. Therefore, I would say zero based off of that.
Hmm.
Zero would be the limit. But, if you had somebody legitimate that went in there and did something like that, I don't know. It would be hard. It would be hard to determine a price because, even if when they do everything right and they spend all that extra time, how much is one other character going to do me? Like it's not going to be more powerful. It's not going to be better. It's just going to be different. And with you know, if it was in a Mortal Kombat or something, I would have no interest because I don't even play all the characters that are there already, kind of thing, because of how unintuitive and everything the design is. Now, if it was something like a Soul Calibur, then that would pique my interest, kind of thing, because I do play a lot of characters on a Soul Calibur kind of thing, and getting a new character on there would be
Hmm.
legitimately valuable, just for variety and another character that you could customize into somebody else,
Yeah.
I can get somebody and make a Ninja Turtle out of them or something along that lines. And,
Hmm.
like, you know, it would all depend on what I would think I can, do with the character in that customization. You know, it would also depend on if I like the style of it, and depending on how many likes to dislikes lined up to what I would price it at. And that would be different from every person. So there's not like this standardized price you could put on it. It would be some people, it would be appealing enough that they would buy it, and other people, it would not be. So, like, the end answer to that is it depends. Ask a lawyer.
But I think Mike has the best solution. You just wait for the super deluxe Ultimate Edition, and then just get everything included for like $10.
Well, if it's a live service, then there is no Ultimate Edition.
Or you wait for like the yearly passes, like they did with Payday.
But that's not a live service.
Payday 2 was kind of live service for like 5 years. It kept getting updates.
Well, continuous updates is early access. That's not
Oh no, it
or
was
continued
released and then it
support.
had more work.
Yeah, but I mean, you couldn't consider that a live service game because you can't. I mean, Oxygen Not Included even after it released, it kept on getting updates. And you can't consider that a live service. You also can't consider like many of their other games that do the same thing. Can't consider those live services. A live service would have a very specific model that continued specifically, and would likely be free to play. We did see something like that with the Dissidia. I think is second game of Dissidia.
Mm.
You know which one I'm talking about.
The Final Fantasy fighting.
Yeah,
Hmm.
I really love the first one, but they did like a free version for I think the second one where you only had access to like three or four characters or five characters or something like that, and then you would have to pay to unlock the characters
Hmm.
going forward. And of course, you know that didn't appeal to me, and I didn't check out the game. I didn't even play the free version. I didn't want to have risk being interested in it, kind of thing. Like I just stayed very, very far away from that.
All right. I think since we're approaching 2 hours, I think that's my final point. Do you have anything you want to end on?
Mm, all the games are very similar, but very different at the same time. all the genres. You know, the beat 'em ups, the fighting games, the smashing games. They're all very mechanically much the same. They're almost the exact same genre, but they're not, and the small differences make just a world of difference in how people enjoy the game. Because, like, you know, you and I really love beat 'em ups and really don't like fighting games. I also don't think we like smash 'em ups either, do we?
Kind of in the middle about them.
So, like, very small changes got you three different directions, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and it's got me
Uh,
two different directions.
mm-hmm. All right, but with that, let's wrap things up for this week's show. So for next week's topic, we're going to get into the RPG genre, looking at RPGs, JRPGs, CRPGs, and any other RPG letters we can think of.
Yeah, and I don't know anything about a RPG. I've never did anything with them.
Well, you should totally play Final Fantasy VII Remake. I heard it's really good.
Although, good point to be making is we're not going to be covering all the letters because we're not going to be talking about ARPGs of any kind,
Hmm.
and we're also not going to be talking about TRPGs of any kind because the topic after next week would be the ARPG discussion, and the topic after that would be the TRPG.
Yeah, it's the RPG trilogy starting next week.
Yep, for the next 3 weeks.
Oh, yes.
And
So,
you know, a notice to everybody is everybody should come and join my Discord and play Neon Continuum there. We
mhm.
should be playing that fairly soon. This coming Saturday should be.
And
And
be sure to check out my Discord for game design talks and for submitting your games and having just some discussions about design and just games in general.
yep, and make sure to check the description of both of our videos. And you'll links to both of our Discords will be down there. Links to our YouTube channels will be down there. So, you know, smash the lick button, lick the smash button on both Josh's channel and my channel. And, you know, join Twitters and all the Discords and everything else.
Hmm. So we will be back next Sunday starting at 4 p.m. ET for our live show. And as always, come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where some of the art and science of games. Until next time, take care.
See ya.